everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. Today, we have a very special program where we'll be reflecting on Earl Lovelace's Is Just a Movie. To tell you a bit more about the novel and the author, we have Paula.
Thank you, Roger. Earl Lovelace celebrated his 90th birthday on 13th July 2025. Beyond that, I don't propose to offer up any biographical details about this author because that would feel almost disrespectful. You know who he is. It's Just a Movie was published in 2011. In this, as in other of Lovelace's novels, we witness an intense advocacy for community, awareness of career politicians, and a Caribbean nationalism that frets about voluntary racial segregation. This is a novel of numerous characters, all of whom are connected, however tenuously, to a reformed Bad John who fancies himself a revolutionary. The novel is equal parts playful and profound. Lovelace praises his characters' virtues as enthusiastically as he makes fun of their foibles. In the lyrical prose of this multimedia mural of a novel, Lovelace pays homage to Caribbean icons, art forms, artists, folklore, and spirituality, both overtly and in ways that are so subtle that the reader takes delight in finding Easter eggs hidden within the colorful mosaic of the text.
Thank you very much, Paula. And I suppose we could begin right where you left off in terms of the novel's narrative. What is your view of the wandering discursive narrative of It's Just a Movie?
I didn't find it discursive. I think if you have to rush to read this novel, it can feel that way. But if you take your time, if you have the luxury of taking your time to go through this novel, um, you will see. And I think also if you um, if you approach the novel as though Trinidad is the main character, the country of Trinidad and Tobago is the main character, then it doesn't feel fragmented whatsoever. Um, the all the human characters are simply facets of Trinidad and Tobago. That's how I read it. You'll remember that I described the novel as a mosaic. That's how it felt to me. It felt like a mosaic. It's all these things that feel disparate, but really they are. It's. I think it's much more cohesive than perhaps is immediately apparent.
I like how you put the Trinidad as the main character, and I think that explains the tempo of the novel. I really felt everything Trinidad about it, the mosaic as you describe, because Trinidad is such a blended society, right? That comes with all sorts of cultural nuances. And this novel does a very good job at capturing that character, that the character which is Trinidad. So I didn't find it disparate. I got into the main vein, and wherever that branched, whatever tributaries it branched into, I was with it. And it felt very Caribbean. It felt so Caribbean. The language, without being overdone. I've read other novels that make an effort to sound Caribbean with the dialect that they use and so on. But this one just rolled off very naturally. It was almost as if Earl Lovelace was sitting in, your living room telling you the story himself. It was that good.
It reminded me of when we talked some time ago now to Cherry Jones, and she described a particular Caribbean way of revealing a story, of starting with one character, but you couldn't just say what they did. You had to say where they come from and who their family were, and you had to give a context. And that's exactly, I think, how Lovelace writes this, right? You meet a character, and then you find their whole backstory, and from that you jump back to where you were, and then you meet another character. So it didn't feel. I can see why. I think Paul has exactly said it. If you're in a rush, then it might feel like you're trying to there's too many people and you can't follow it. But actually, there's a luxurious kind of strolling, if you like, through these different peak townspeople, because they're also set in one town, right? Mostly between this in this town of Cascadou, and a little bit in Laventille and a little bit of Port of Spain. But you're just rolling through the town, meeting the inhabitants over generations, right? And I really enjoyed that. That this kind of just all the different people. It reminded me a little bit of another novel we read, one of the very early ones we read together, by Leonie Ross. This one Sky Day, right? The way that all of these people, all these different lives and characters and curiosities, all fit together to make a kind of perfect whole. And I completely agree. I think Trinidad is a main character. Sometimes it feels like Trinidad more than Tobago, because Tobago is sometimes an ancillary character, like a bit of a secondary character within the novel, if you like, the way that they refer to it. But and also the way that the rest of the region comes into play. Grenada has a little side character as well under the PRG. They talk about the way that things that happen in Trinidad affect the rest of the region as well. So it's I think definitely Trinidad is the beating heart, but it's very self-consciously Caribbean as well.
And before RJ comes in, because I know he's chomping at the bit to do so, you see that last point you captured there about Trinidad being like the center that the rest of the Caribbean is connected to. In the time that this novel captures, that's very much how Trinidad was. Um, that was Trinidad. We had migration from St. Vincent, Grenada, and so on to Trinidad, and they moved. Most of them moved into Morvan, Laventille, which is so it's very much about that.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with all the positions expressed before, and I think maybe discursive isn't the right fit in my description of it. But I also think Lovelace was quite deliberate in how he approached the narrative of the novel, because one, he was given us many different perspectives through the eyes of not someone who's unreliable, but someone who makes a living out of making the meaningless, and and I can't remember the exact words, but I think Lovelace was quite deliberate in setting up the narrative that way, where it seems wandering, but it isn't necessarily a wandering narrative, but that's just life through the many different characters that we had over several periods. So I loved it. I mean, I don't think there was anything wrong with the narrative. I just found it at times to be a bit discursive. All right, so we could actually shift now to a bit more of the politics in the novel. So throughout the novel, Lovelace makes mention of this PM. He never really names the PM. Did he create an immortal, invincible prime minister, or did he simply refuse to distinguish the prime ministers across the many decades in Trinidad and Tobago? I I think I have two theories. I think he genuinely wanted to show that power and governance is continuous, and regardless of who is in the seat, that's just a power structure that exists, and people will wield power regardless of their background. And then I also think that he he kind of wanted us to use our own imaginations to distinguish these people, because he gives us nuggets along the way. So we know who was the prime minister at the time of the Black Power Revolution. We know who was the prime minister in the early 2000s. And I think rather than being explicit and saying prime minister so and so, he wants us to use our imagination, and maybe he just doesn't want us to use real prime ministers. We know who the real prime ministers of Trinidad and Tobago were, but he just wants us to know this is just the prime minister. Just this is just a guy who held power at this particular time.
I think I'll probably disagree a little bit with that one. I think he's very clear in some of the reference in that he's talking about Eric Williams, in the way that he describes small things that Williams is famous for. And so I think it. So I don't know as much about later prime ministers. So maybe they're also similarly recognizable to Trinidadians or people that know Trinidad politics much better than I do. But certainly, like you say, that in the early points, they're talking about the PM. But I do think there's something in what you're saying about continuity, because if we think about Aunt Magenta, who's waiting for the PM to apologize or explain what happened to her son, who's a member of what we know as Nuff, and dies in the hills alongside. Because I think what Lovelace does is he mixes kind of what we know already from history, and fiction. He mixes them. So he names real people that died. Beverly Jones is a real person. I'm going to get his name wrong, but I think he says Guy Sherwood. Is the other person that, and those are real characters from history. But I don't know if Franklin is. But maybe he is. I don't know. Um, but that she continues to ask that question well after the real Eric Williams is dead, suggests that the PM character is also a stand-in for kind of represent the national government, whoever's in power. So she continues to refer to him the PM, and she does it with the same familiarity as if she's talking about the same person. But we know that that can't physically be true because that person that she was definitely referring to earlier on is no longer around. But that's, I think it's some of the skill of the novel, right? That he draws these representations, and you kind of understand what's going on, even though things are not signposted with blazing lights in the way that we're probably accustomed to in some ways in other ways of telling stories.
I actually wanted to, because Kesua brought up something. So I suppose we could have something new where I'll give a quote and we could discuss it. So, Aunt Magenta get thin. This is the beginning of the quote. She put on some size. She dry up again. She start talking to herself. Sometimes I would find her in the kitchen talking to the absent Franklin, asking him how he could do this thing, how he could run away from his future, how he could leave her in such pain and the cricket field without his light, or asking the Prime Minister to explain the reason for the killing of her son who was a good boy, who was only standing up for the same freedoms that you preach in. How you expect him to be less than the man you paint in your speeches? What you expect when he hear you talking about what it is to be free? And how, if Franklin didn't bow down to anybody in cricket, who you expect him to bow down to in life? And I was wondering whether the panel had any thoughts on this, because Keswa sort of raised it in her previous answer. And I mean, I had several thoughts on it. The last sort of line in that took me back to CLR James's Beyond the Boundary, and how he explained how cricket was sort of this thing where West Indians at the time, that was an acceptable term, used cricket to escape poverty, to escape colonialism. It was an anti-colonial tool. And I saw that throughout the novel with Lovelace's mention of cricket. And I thought that was an ode to CLR James as well. And then in terms of Aunt Magenta just being very bold, and even if she wasn't speaking directly to the PM at the time, it just shows how fearless she was. She didn't fear this guy who we assume was, well, Eric Williams, who was a very powerful man who wielded a lot of power in the country. And here was this very ordinary working class woman who was upset with the actions of the prime minister and wanted to face him.
I think also the Aunt Magenta character was very interesting because we have a culture of the messianic politician in the Caribbean. Eric Williams certainly was one of those messianic politicians. And Aunt Magenta loved him that way. You know, he was her Messiah. As much as she was upset and she knew that she had been wronged because she lost her son because of his policies, she couldn't quite bring herself, she couldn't at all bring herself to reject the prime minister. She kept waiting for him to redeem himself. You know, she gave him so many chances. And I think there's a lot in that passage you read. There's so much to unpack. But that is one of the things that struck me.
There's a lot to unpack. Certainly, I was going to say before you got in there, Paula, that there's a Caribbean reality in terms of these politicians who become messiahs, right? That's to use your term. But they are, all politics is local, so they are very accessible to the ordinary voter, if I should use that. And the ordinary voters, they waste no time in letting the Messiah know how he stands or she stands. They express exactly what their local issues are, their personal issues are. And I think Caribbean politics, Kessel, you exposed to the UK thing, but I think Caribbean politics has a special flavor to it, and I think Lovelace really did justice to capture that in the novel. That passage that you quoted there, Royal J, as Paul said, there's so much in there to unpack. But Magenta was person about, hey, you promised this, but really, are you living in my life? Are you in my shoes? You understand what's going on here? How can you have these expectations? And it's all of that that brought me back to our own elections, Paula, which just had a forceful expression, right? A forceful ant magenta expression, but an aggregate of many ant magentas, right? I'm speaking in code. Paula understands, but yes, I think there's a lot in that passage to unpack.
And as you were mentioning the flavor of Caribbean politics, I found the scene when the lamps were going out. I mean, I'm not going to reveal too much, but it's just the sort of closeness, the expression, the I think Lovelace was capturing something that's just uniquely Caribbean. And I suppose in other small territories outside of the Caribbean, there might be versions of it. But the kind of politics that we saw playing out in Cascadoo, for example, that's something that you would that's a very Caribbean political scene. People sort of giving up their all. They would literal, literally rip the shirts off their backs to provide light for some of these leaders, because some people do view them as godlike figures.
But
You know,
absolutely, and even the scene of a political meeting. Okay, when there's a political meeting in a village, that is like a main activity. Everybody comes out. It's if you imagine a Caribbean society back in the 70s. I grew up in areas and remembered areas in St. Vincent that didn't have electricity and all that. So that flambeau scene, that lamp scene is very familiar. But they'll go into a part in the little village where there are streetlights. There's somebody who you get a hook up from, but most people don't have electricity, and the lights going out is nothing unusual. So I just liked the way that story was told, because it was very nostalgic for me, um, going back to those very scenes that played out here in St. Vincent.
and then along the lines of politics, Lovelace gives us some insight into oppositional or third party politics. So, and I know Kessler would love this. So, is the way Lovelace portrays the hard work party an indictment of the work of Caribbean public intellectuals? Kessler was laughing.
I'm like, why would I love this question? Surely we'd all be equally engaged with such a question. That's why we're here together on this panel, talking about these books month in, month out. But I don't mind taking it. I mean, I think I read the what called the Hard Rock Party as the Tapia House crowd around Lloyd Best, um, and Mr. Beckford, um, and so and this kind of and that kind of group, and I thought it was a bit of a maybe I don't know, maybe as a historian I read it as a quite a capturing of various political moments that happened historically in real life, and so I'm constantly seeing these characters through the lens of real figures. Perhaps I'm willing to be wrong about that. But they seemed, the idea that they fought elections and then after they didn't win them were like elections at electoral politics, and have an intellectual reason as to why that's not a good thing for them to be involved with. Um, yeah, for me, I read it that way, and so I didn't read it as an indictment of Caribbean public intellectuals at all, because we did, in part because we later see, because I associate it with their actions with a very specific group one, but also because when we see the rise of the character Clayton Blondell, we have a different kind of public intellectual, right? He's going to take a slightly different stance, but he's also very much in the business of the mind.
That's interesting that you are seeing Clayton Blondell as a public intellectual, because I saw him as a pseudo intellectual. Clayton Blondell is one of those we were kings kind of people who don't generally make very much sense.
So I understand that point of view. I would say there's a different kind of intellectual because he reads a lot, right? No one's ever going to say, I think, of a Clayton Blondell that he doesn't know his ancient African history, right? Or that he's peddling a fake history. The stuff he knows is real. It's a different kind of intellectual tradition, but it is an intellectual tradition that he belongs to, and he might have different ways of expressing themselves, and other people buy into it that express themselves differently from Clayton Blondell in particular, right? The way that he does it is different, but there are university academics that would, you know what I mean. So I'd be careful not to discard them as intellectuals and part of an intellectual. Personally, I wouldn't, but and it's just a different intellectual tradition. But similarly, the guys Mr. Bissoon, they have their own intellectual tradition as well, right? And they argue that from the point, and this PM in particular, we know that Eric Williams was a very well educated man, and so public intellectuals are a big part of this novel. And arguably, the character King Kala, the main character, is as a Calypsonian is also a kind of public intellectual. His job is to speak the feelings of the people and also and analyze their situation in a way that is both entertaining for them, so he wins the contest, but is also truthful, so that it speaks to their hearts, right? Um, and so again, it's just a different kind of way of doing the same intellectual work, in my humble opinion. Um, I have a question, if I may. Did
Before
anybody else?
you ask the question, when you on the theme of the intellectualism, I think the period where there was this black consciousness, black power movement um, across the Caribbean, and Trinidad was also a hotspot for this sort of intellectualism. I mean, this is this kind of discourse that dominated um, politics and life and living. I think I don't know if Paul would agree with me, but some of it is in large part, I think, absent now from the way we we discuss politics. It's more the instant. I need my back wall attended to. I need my road fixed. And too many potholes. But the deep stuff that comes out in the identity politics, the whole thing about your heritage and how we chart a way forward, how we fashion a society. Um, a lot of this is about the politics in this book, which I think is kind of absent today, disappointingly so. Um, so it was about intellectualism. A lot of the characters in there, as you say, the Calypsonian king, what was his name again?
King Kala.
King Kala. I mean, intellectual. I agree with Paula though. The Blondell guy. I know some of them here um, who are very pseudo intellectual. They tackle topics that they don't have the depth really to deal with, but to the uninformed or the unaware, they sound impressive, right? So I got that in Blondell.
I think
Yeah,
Tony and I read Blondell the same way because we live in the same country.
I think it may be that. I think Tony actually agree with your point as well that the sort of intellectualism that existed in the 20th century politics in the Caribbean has certainly it's disappeared. And I mean, in Trinidad and Tobago, on both sides of the divide, because you had Eric Williams and the PNM, but also in the opposition parties back then, you have several intellectuals as well, and those who just never really got elected. And I think Kessie was pointing to some of those as well, like the Lloyd Best. So I think that's what Lovelace was pointing to, and he was saying, look, we had all these options back then, but then he also gave us hints of the race politics that played out and still plays out in Trinidad and Tobago. So you could be bright as a bulb, well read, well educated, put forward all these theories, but there's that thing that you have to overcome. In Trinidad and Tobago, it's the race politics. In smaller territories, they're, you know, finer details that people do have to overcome in order to get elected. But Keswa, you had a question before. I'm not sure if you still want to ask it.
Yeah, I'm going to finish up this point on public intellectuals. I think Lovelace is also pointing to the lack of vision, right, and the lack and the kind of the sort kind of shrinking of political possibilities and intellectualism in a way when he talks about the selling of dreams, which is such a vivid image, right, of encouraging people to just frankly, such straight up sell your dreams, give up your hopes for a better life, a better future, all those imaginings, all of the stuff that starts at the beginning all around the Black Power revolution. Um, just sell it for hard cash, you know. It was wonderful. But yeah, I think he doesn't skip a beat, right? He picks that up as well, right? The way that our I
I saw
political
so much more in
narrative.
that sell your dream, if you want to call it a metaphor. I mean, it's the selling passport discussion as well, right? I think Paula and Roger can relate to that. I mean, what what won't you sell? What does not become transactional for your survival, right? And I think that was a bigger point. Or certainly that's how I read it. And I thought it was so brilliant, choosing your dreams, your hopes, your aspirations, everything that defines you and what your future you want your future to be. You're going to transactionalize it for something short term. I just thought it was so brilliant, the way Lovelace dealt with that.
I just want to jump in here with just one little point that I thought was just so profound. It was a very simple statement that Arlene made to Claude. She said, "You spoil the zip, Claude." And that was such a powerful statement. Only Loveless can do this, man. Only Loveless can give. How many words is that? You spoil the zip, Claude. 5 words. 5 words. And I mean, it was just, he said so much in 5 words. Just wanted to shout that out.
Yes, definitely, and that was a really powerful scene as well. It came towards the end, but I think it captured a lot of what the novel was about. And I think Lovelace was setting this up big time because the second chapter, the title of that chapter became the title of the book, and there was also something very powerful in there. You know, it was just like we just can't die. So absolutely brilliant novel. It was this was amazing. I don't have anything else to say on that.
I'm
But
going to ask
another
a question
That
then.
was that was the quotation I wanted to supply
Mhm.
to you guys. The whole passage about dying. Um, you know, you just can't die like this. It's I highlighted it. I just never got the time to send it to you, but it was classic. Another classic passage.
Kesawa?
So my question was, to what like do we think that like authors are always like more one character than another oftentimes when they write something, right? And even the most like big star brilliant ones like Lovelace is Loveless. But does anybody else think that he is absolutely definitely King Kala? He's got this kind of view, he's the storyteller. And view is so view in the sense of the longer term, right? This idea that because I don't know if you read it, I didn't feel like he was an old fogey, but it's the maturity of an older man kind of viewpoint. It felt like this novel's written from. It's not a foolish young person that hasn't seen anything. This is someone that's seen generations come and go, seen marriages rise and fall, seen relationships break and be mended. Like there's a sense of time that is long that this viewpoint is covering. Um, and for me, I was like, this. I think he thinks he comes like. Whereas I think when we read, do you remember when we read the Bone Readers? And I was like, Jacob Ross thinks he's the 25-year-old young man, but he's not. We loved when we did Jacob Ross. If you're watching, whereas it felt like Loveless was King Carla for me. Did anybody else?
That's interesting because I saw Loveless in Claude. Yeah, because they even share biographical details,
In
career,
terms of the
you know.
forestry and yes,
Yes, yes, yes. And if you read Lovelace, if you read his other novels, he always his the relationship between Claude and Arlene was one of the more important things we saw about Claude, right? And Lovelace always has these very tender relationships between men and women. Always, always very tender, very respectful. Um, and he never they're never without problems. He shows you that relationships between men and women are difficult, but he's giving you some guidance. He's offering us some guidance. If you make an effort to be respectful to each other, if you make an effort, and he's saying it to men, mostly I see him saying it to men. If you make an effort to see your wife, you can surmount these problems. So I saw Loveless in Claude, and the thoughtfulness, and you see sometimes, how Claude kind of gave up on the people, and got frustrated, and then Carnival brought him back. And I think that is Loveless. I think Loveless gets frustrated. He's like, I think when you see it in the novel, he's like, why can't we do this better? Why do we have all this nonsense about race when we know we're all one people? And I think so that I read Claude. Lovelace may be in Kankala as well, but I thought there was a lot of Lovelace in Claude.
I could see how Kesso could also see Lovelace in King Carla. I agree with you and Roger 100% about Claude, or leading up to 100%. But King Carla as well. You see the way Lovelace writes, is like how a Calypsonian, a traditional Calypsonian, that is, expresses himself. You see that sort of, even the way the novel starts, where you describe, King Carla describes who he is, the power that he holds as a Calypsonian, what he can do. Same with Lovelace's pen, and the satire, because there was a lot of satire throughout the novel, and that was King Carla as well, right? So I can see a lot of Lovelace in King Carla, too. So maybe he was, threading both, but more so, Claude, and that's how I saw that.
And I wonder too whether Lovelace, because in this novel, he bows to other writers, um, because you see him giving a nod to Kamau. It's a very very short line where somebody says it. That is Kamau's negus. Um, you see him bowing to the harder they come, when he talks about Starboy Can't Die. And I'm wondering, because I know that Lovelace is a fan of Patrick Chamoiseau, and I'm wondering if this putting himself in the novel is not a nod to Chamoiseau, because Chamoiseau writes himself into his novels always as a casual observer. He's never a very active character. But in fact, he even writes his own name into the novels. And I was wondering, because I know that Lovelace is a big fan of Chamoiseau, I was wondering if that, him writing himself into this novel, because I don't recall any other novel where I thought Lovelace was writing himself into the novel. But I was wondering if he was not, because he shouts out other artists, both some of them overtly, not just in. There's an afterword in which he does it overtly,
But he
but
also does it in the
even
text
even
as
in the
well.
even in the text he does it overtly, and then in some others he just throws in the nuggets and leaves it to us to figure it out. And I was wondering if this was not one of the nuggets he was throwing out.
And just diverting a bit, the character Sonny Boy, um, who to me was a main character. Um, you see, going back to your point, King Kala, um, I thought Lovelace vicariously through King Kala was giving commentary on Sonny Boy's life, his path. So I, I I don't. So to me, that was Loveless through King Kala, right? I'm just trying to bear out your point, Kessel, that maybe he wrote himself into that character as well, because the examination of Sonny Boy's life was done almost meticulously by the character King Kala. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Made sense.
And to me, if King Carlo wasn't Loveless, it was somebody who he knows and knows quite well, because throughout the novel as well, he repeats the line, I'm really a poet, but I can't survive as a poet. So that's why I sing calypso. I'm paraphrasing here. It's very real. I mean, Lovelace is one of, and it's in his bios, he's one of the few writers who remained almost entirely in Trinidad throughout his career, and never migrated, except for very brief periods. So I think he was definitely given hints there. And back to your point, Paul, in terms of trying to highlight racial tensions and how to overcome them, I think Lovelace also used the theme of carnival to do that, and it is a very common motif in his work. Dragon Can't Dance, and I recently read his poetry collection, which was released this year. It was like previously unpublished poems, and that is also a recurring motif in his poetry, just carnival, and how he uses carnival as a unifier, and he goes to extreme lengths, not just to portray it as an Afro Trini kind of thing, but he includes the chutney, the tassa, and throughout the novel, he asks us to question. Well, he asks us to question the sort of coexistence of these different ethnicities in Trinidad and Tobago, and he uses the character of Manic especially. So I want to give a quote here again. So this is the quote: Manic is looking at the red flag. The red flag is the one for war, I will say quickly, cautioning. The green one is the one for peace. And yes, just as I was wondering where this talk was heading, I hear Manik saying, "You know what I want. I want to carry the red flag. Give me the red flag." At first, I thought Manik was making joke, but when I look at him, I see the man is serious. He wanted to carry the red flag. The red flag? About 3, 4 fellas asked. That is what I want to carry. Then it entered my mind. He is the only Indian here. How could we allow him to carry the red flag, the principal symbol of the black struggle? And how could he, knowing the situation, want to carry the red flag? But if, and this must have popped into his head the same way it popped into mine, if he couldn't carry the red flag, then what was he doing here? What was his purpose? Because if he was one of the fellas, one of us, if we were in this together, how come he wasn't allowed to carry the red flag? And if he couldn't carry the red flag, what was his position in this demonstration? Why should he be in it at all? Was he there just to support us? Or was he there as a separate revolutionary in his own right? What did he want? What was his position?
Test of Caribbean existence, and how we trust other people, how we trust those who are not us, how Indians trust blacks, how the blacks trust Indians, etc., etc. That is one thing I got from that, and that's the ultimate test because you are identifying with a common cause until the symbol of it is called upon to be borne by the what you think is the authentic um, advocate of the cause. And to be honest with you, it is a Caribbean relationship issue, um, and I believe that that was at the crux of what Lovelace was articulating there.
Loveless was asking us to grapple with these hard questions because when I read it, it was a hard question for me because I did see it from the perspective of the African, um, the African Caribbean characters because I'm African Caribbean. But when they asked the hard question, if we want, Manic is volunteering to be part of this struggle. And we are saying that we are all one nation. Why can't he carry the red flag? And it made me think of a discussion we had in Jamaica at one point, where we were talking about national symbols and what the colors of the flag represented. And there is one part of the flag is black. And there, even in fact, even when we were approaching independence, there was a conversation about the black representing the people. And I have a friend who is Chinese Jamaican, and she was livid when we were having that conversation because she was right. She was right to be angry with those of us who were saying that this is what the black should symbolize. She was right because she's Chinese Jamaican. She's as Jamaican as all the rest of us. How dare we suggest that our national symbols should exclude her? Um, so it was a very, when I read it, I remember that conversation. And it's a difficult thing. And we have to have among ourselves hard conversations. So,
I read that scene very, very differently. Um, Not because of the. I think Lovelace does it really cleverly in that he takes us into the mind of those who are like, oh, can he be here? What he asks all these questions. But then when we see why he wanted to carry the red flag in a later scene and the speech he was going to make in 1970, the reasoning behind it, we were like, oh man, he should have carried the flag. He was right. And then later on, because that opportunity is missed, we see that even the character Manic has now changed his position. And by the time he does speak, he says very different words to what he would have said in that moment. And I think he's lamenting the loss of the possibilities that a unified front at that moment, and not just a colorblind unified front, but a really careful analysis of how he got to that point.
I don't think we read it differently though, Cassaway. I think we read it exactly the same way.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think you definitely made the same point there, because it was what we see later of Manic was Lovelace telling us that this was an opportunity lost, and I'm not sure, but I suppose we could kind of see Lovelace's views on the Black Power movement, but I think he was telling us that that was an opportunity to unite the country, to get all these people behind a a unified force, and that it was never really about race. It was just about class and power. And he gives an ode to Walter Rodney in the book, and that's exactly what Rodney preached as well. It's class, and because people want to maintain class, they then use race, and that's Manic fell to that, and unfortunately, it perpetuates today. This book was written in 2011, but I'm sure Lovelace is at home laughing at how things are playing out, in the world today, because the more things change, the more they remain the same. I think I want to ask, can you think of any writers whose works appear to have been influenced by Earl Lovelace's works, and what led you to that conclusion?
Man, I thought of so many. Um, in fact, I have the books behind me because I didn't want to forget them. Anthony Joseph, that
That's exactly who I was going to say.
Anthony Joseph, um, Justin Haynes, uh, oh gosh, what's her name? Barbara, that novel we did, the writer,
Barbara Jenkins.
Barbara Jenkins, even I think Berkeley Wendell Semple, the Guyanese writer. The concern for community, I see all throughout the with Anthony Joseph, the lyrical language, um, the the humor, in all of those novels. In Ibis by Justin Haynes, this is something Lovelace tries to persuade us of in all the novels, that the characters in our villages whom we regard as waste men are not actually waste men. I don't buy it, but but that is something that he preaches in every novel, that there's no such thing as a waste man. And in fact, Lovelace, if you read his novels, Lovelace loves waste men. But the same kind of support for waste men that Justin
It's
Haynes
very
is,
Trinidadian,
yeah, in Ibis is is
it's very Trinidadian. That whole waste man, what you interpret as a waste man thing, is it's very much the character of the laid back Trinidad man who's full of humor, likes to lime, likes to maybe to you appear useless, but um, I think there's some value that they add that Lovelace sees, and I too, as well, Paula, see. And I'm not a waste man, right? But I'm just saying that I agree with the man. I don't think these characters are to be written off as waste men. It's just their presentation a lot of the times, but they are
I
contributors.
just wanted I
Mm.
just wanted to read one of the quotations where and I'm not dismissing what Lovelace argues for, because he does. When I see him arguing for the waste men, I see the value of the argument. I just don't buy it in the end. But I wanted to read one of the quotations where he's selling the argument that a waste man is actually a very useful character. Aunt Magenta was puzzled at my concern for Sonny Boy. Donny, Sonny Boy is no revolutionary. He's a bad John. What you expect from him? The heroes we inherited had it easy. Distance had crowned them with halos. Sonny Boy was in the here and now. In the brilliance of this light, we could see his every flaw. I know Sonny Boy was a hustler. He had lived a twisted life. I know there was nothing pure about him. I knew his story. But he stood for something, and I was beginning to see that however twisted he might be, what he had contributed to us was a no. I'm not taking that. That no joined the no's our heroes had said to the colonizing world. His no was directed at his brethren, not only from a point of view of not wanting what was on offer, but in the suggestion that there was something else we had to build. That was his importance to him, to us. So that is Lovelace defending Sonny Boy, who is the waste man I see in this novel.
And you see that and not taking that mantra, which defines Sonny Boy throughout the novel. It's also a very important um, theme in the novel of resistance, um, and there's so many things that Lovelace brought together in this narrative, and as you read your quotation, and not taking that and not taking that theme of resistance um, was also very strong. I found, and yes, Sonny Boy can easily be written off as a waste man if you see the casual side of him and the failures, I suppose, and the restarts that he's had, and perhaps a lack of dedication to purpose and task. But yet, I think holistically, if you look at the character, he did have a lot to contribute, Paula.
And in that, he took a jab at some of our leaders as well, because he said the heroes we had inherited had it easy. Distance crowned
Yes.
them with halos. He's
Yeah.
to me, he's suggesting that because we don't truly know these people, but a lot of them were corrupt and had a lot going on. I think he absolutely brilliant novel,
Yeah, we
Paula.
have we have Facebook now, right? So there ain't no distance.
I mean, we could go on for hours. This was an amazing novel written by a Caribbean legend, absolute legend. Is Just a Movie by Earl Lovelace. We had an absolute pleasure discussing it today. Thank you for joining us. Have a lovely day.